Thank you. Thank you so much. Our next session is a fireside chat. It's called the AI for Social Good. We have the panelists, Mr. Sriram Rajamani from Microsoft Research India, Professor Lavanya Marla from the University of Illinois. It's going to be moderated by Aditi Agrawal, who is a journalist at the Hindustan Times. She covers technology policy, privacy, surveillance, cybersecurity, online speech, and the Indian Election Commission. With that, I'd like to welcome the speakers and the moderator for the talk. Please welcome Aditi Agrawal.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aditi Agrawal. I'm a journalist with Hindustan Times, and welcome to this panel on AI for social good. If you've been reading newspapers over the last 2 years, if you've been on the internet, or if you've talked to another human being, you've probably come across the term AI and how it's going to change the world. And since OpenAI announced ChatGPT-3 back in 22, AI and its capabilities have captured public imagination, both as a source of possibilities and as a source of fear. So in this panel, we'll go over how AI can be used as a social good. What does social good actually mean? What does AI mean in this context? Because AI has become a catch-all term for everything technical or technological. Where is AI already being used? And how do we deal with the risks associated with deployment of AI? We have two eminent speakers here to help us understand this subject better. We have Sriram Rajamani, who's the Corporate Vice President and Managing Director of Microsoft Research India, whose work has impacted both academic and industrial practice in programming languages, systems security, and formal verification. And we have Lavanya Marla, who's an associate professor in industrial and enterprise systems engineering at the University of Illinois. She designs adaptable logistics and transportation systems, prioritizing critical service resilience, emergency medical services improvement, environmental sustainability, and transportation innovation towards improving social benefits. Thank you, Lavanya. Thank you, Sriram, for being here. So let's get into this without further ado. How do we understand AI in this context? Because as I mentioned, it's become a catch-all term. How do we distinguish it from, say, machine learning? Is machine learning a part of it? How do we distinguish it from data analytics? Lavanya, if you want to go first.
Can you hear me? Yeah, so like you said, actually AI has become a catch-all term for literally anything involving analytics and data. I would say AI is an umbrella set of technologies, a mathematical set of tools and algorithms that is broader than machine learning. It's a bigger set of technologies. But really what I would say is the intelligence that AI speaks about. And I don't want to call it artificial because I would really like to look at this intelligence as combining with human intelligence in some way through expert knowledge and other stuff. But AI is really a way that systems look at data, build algorithms to understand that data and make decisions using that data. And at the same time, as those decisions are being tested either offline or online, learning from the outcomes of those decisions and improving upon it in continuous real time. It's not a static system. It's a very dynamic set of tools, algorithms, and technologies. And I want to keep that a little bit broad. So we'll get to some examples and look at different kinds of AI and where they're used and how. So that's what I would define it as briefly.
Sriram, to you. And also, if you can touch upon what Lavanya mentioned, who makes those decisions and who oversees those decisions?
First of all, I would also agree that these terms, the analytics, machine learning, AI, there's a progression between them. I mean, analytics is more, if you have a piece of data and you want to discover patterns in it, build mostly statistical techniques to ask questions about it, identify patterns, ask questions. That's pretty much, I think, what data analytics meant. I think machine learning, I think, is more development over statistical techniques. And there's different kinds of machine learning. There's unsupervised machine learning. There's supervised machine learning. There's reinforcement machine learning. There are various kinds of things. And as Lavanya said, right, AI is a much more bigger umbrella term. And I would say I would say it's about using computers to do tasks that we typically associate that intelligent beings can do. Things like perception, right? That we can perceive, and as Lavanya was saying, reasoning about what we perceive, representing information in our brains, continually learning based on feedback we get based on the actions we take, adapting, decision making. I think AI is an umbrella term associated with all of them. And to your question about who makes these decisions, I think again I would agree with Lavanya that you should really think about AI systems as decision support, right? They are best used together with humans, and they aid humans in making better decisions. That's how one should think about them.
Got it. Lavanya, would you want to add to that? On the decision
Yeah,
making
and I think when we used to think about data analytics, it usually used to be like a single way of statistical analysis or a single algorithm. Now when we think of AI, we are really thinking about a series, an ensemble of algorithms, really. You're looking at one way of understanding, modeling the world as you see it, whatever data is being represented or whatever part of the world is being represented by that data. And then you're building one model, but that model can be outdated. You can improve upon those. And you can build really a series and an ensemble of different ways of modeling that world as you see more and more information about that world being revealed to you in time.
So there's an iterative approach involved.
Absolutely. So I would call that more of like, a loop approach where you're learning, you may have a model, that model learns and it improves, and it's maybe not the same model, it's an improved version of the model in a later instant of time. Really.
Got it.
So you're thinking about a very, very dynamic, evolving system. That's why we are calling these as intelligent systems. And that's where, this is how humans have been perceiving the world, right? We make a mistake, we learn from it, and then we iterate and improve upon it. And that's what we want in these systems as well. It's not just one set of decisions or one algorithm or one set of predictions that you have from it.
Got it. I wanted to go over in your work, where have you used or seen AI being used for social good? And Sriram, I'll begin with you. What are those instances, and how do you assess that something is social good? How do you make that decision that, okay, perhaps helping farmers is a social good? Or I know about some of the projects, you had mentioned them earlier in our conversation, about helping people stay on track with their tuberculosis medication is a social good. How do you make that assessment? How do you prioritize?
See, I think social good starts with people and communities. It doesn't start with technology. It starts with problems. I mean, social good is for community good. What are problems and how do we solve them? So we start with them. And the problems are unsurprising, right? If you look at any community, any city, any country, any region, the issues are, education, health, food security, agriculture, people's safety, equitable access to services, health services, legal services, justice. I mean, those are the things that basic needs that people have, and when people don't have those basic needs satisfied, right, it's a real issue. So I think social good starts with that. It starts with compassion for people around you, and technology is just a very small part. I think it's a very important one, but it is a part of. It's a lever in many ways. It's a lever and it's an amplifier for solving those problems. And the way I've always thought about it is that even in many projects that you mentioned, technology is a part. But when it succeeds, right, it succeeds because it is integrated with people, systems, governments, and other organizations that connect people together to solve these problems. And technology somehow helps the people in the system function more efficiently than otherwise. It maybe amplifies their ability so that they can be more effective at solving these problems than they were before. So that's how I sort of think about that as an enabler to solve social problems, rather than a standalone, like a genie magic lamp solution to that problem by itself. And it's not that. I mean, it's actually something that helps a community solve its problems better.
Right. Would you want to explain using one example, whichever one you'd like, just so that our audience who may not know about Microsoft's projects can know better?
I could do that. You know, you mentioned tuberculosis medication adherence. I could give that as an example. So many of you in the audience might know that TB is one of the leading killers of people in the world today. Many million people die out of TB every year, and in India is a significant number of people. Many millions of people. I think 1.5, 2 million people contract TB, and I think maybe 60, 70% of them die in India. And there's many issues. I mean, first of all, there's diagnosis. Many people don't get diagnosed. And even if the people that get diagnosed, there is a treatment. I mean, it's bacterial and there is a treatment for it. But you have to take treatment for 6 months. And people typically feel better after 1 month. You know, they feel better. And then the medication has toxic side effects. So people, if they are not educated, you know, they could just stop taking medication. So this project that Aditi was referring to, it's called 99 Dots. We came up with a technique to monitor who's taking medication so that the healthcare workers can intervene with people who are actually not taking medication, rather than go visiting everybody, right? I mean, if there's a million people, it's hard to visit every one of them every day to check whether they're taking medication. So if I can get a sensing system to understand who is not taking the medication, then you could do that. And that's what the technology and the AI is used to do. And it's incredibly effective, right? It's been deployed at large scale and so on. So that's kind of, so it's in here, right? It's not that we are replacing the human that is counseling and taking the medication. That's irreplaceable, right? But we are using the technology to focus their energy to people who are not taking the medication. Otherwise, they don't have to waste visiting 100 houses, where in the 90 houses, people are already taking the medication. But you know, you can spend your time effectively on the 10 people who are not taking the medication. So that's kind of an example.
I think people over there were very happy to hear about that project. So, so what's the AI part of it? How is it different from, say, monitoring through an app where you're not really using, say, sophisticated algorithms, an iterative approach, don't have feedback? How is that AI?
So you're absolutely right? You know, you could monitor it even without AI. But where the AI comes in is that if you start monitoring over time, you can build predictive algorithms to predict who is more likely to miss the medication later. Because you know, there's patterns that you can actually see that enables you to catch people who are going to get out of medication even earlier and counsel them earlier. That's where the AI gets used.
We'll come to predictive, sorry, that was pretty loud. We'll come to predictive algorithms in a little bit, but Lavanya, I wanted to come to you. What's your work been around when it comes to using AI for social good? Because from what I understand, it's not geared towards the individual, but rather, say, an organization or a community or a population that way.
Yes, absolutely. So again, I agree with Sriram in terms of when you say you're picking a social good problem in particular, of course, many other problems as well, but when you pick in particular social good problems, it's about one, identifying or caring for a particular community or section of the community and trying to say how do you improve results, access, and whether it's health or justice or other outcomes for those section of the population, for example. But the kind of systems I study are related to networked systems. So parts where components of the system are all connected with each other, and you're highly resource constrained. But I'm also very interested in emerging economies such as India, Africa, and other places. And some of my work has been in transportation, and some of it has been in healthcare delivery. For example, in the healthcare delivery space, I've looked at how to allocate ambulances in places like India, especially considering the nuances of what happens behaviorally, implementation-wise and otherwise in this setting versus compared to, let's say, a US type of setting. There are important nuances where AI can help, learning from the system. How do you understand what are the routes through which ambulances should travel, for example, so which are faster than others, right?
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but can AI take into account the unpredictable traffic of India where you have cows, goats, chickens, and humans on the same road, along with like myriad
That's what we attempted to do. What we tried to do is figure out which routes are more uncertain versus which routes are less uncertain, for example. So there are ways of understanding risks in these systems. For example, there may be routes which are longer but less uncertain, whereas routes which are shorter on average but more uncertain. That means the variance on certain routes is higher. So when you want to give time-bound healthcare delivery, you want to choose those routes in very specific ways. The other thing is about how humans behave in these systems, whether giving way to ambulances or even how you have decentralized ambulance services in India. You have 108, you have, let's say, major hospitals which have their own fleets of ambulances. Humans behave by calling multiple types of ambulance centers. We are actually capturing the fact that there is this notion of competition between different entities in how ambulance systems have to be designed. This does not exist anywhere else in the world. You know, there is fundamentally novel research technology that has to be built for addressing these kind of systems. And that's just one example. But when you look at many others, you really have to understand the nuances of that system, that particular domain, its data. So I would say when I think about AI, since I come from a field called operations research, operations research has this idea of bringing in systemic information about the system, modeling that mathematically. AI or CS type of modeling has this idea of bringing in large amounts of data and using that. And what I'm doing is blending both of these, because you need domain knowledge and systemic knowledge, structural information about the system, to say this is how the system is behaving based on our expert knowledge and other things. Plus, we need data. And we need continuous learning from that data. We want to blend the strengths of all of these different fields to make the right decisions. So that's what we do in our work. And other things are like, you know, transportation system resilience and so on. But I'll stop there for the moment.
So have you been able to implement any of these systems anywhere, and what has the response been if you've been able to do that?
Yeah, implementing, we are in the process. So
is there a POC yet, a proof of concept perhaps?
Yeah, so we have actually tested this on some data from AP and some data from Tamil Nadu. And we've been in the process for the past 7 or 8 years in trying to implement it in Tamil Nadu, actually Chennai and surrounding districts. What we've been doing is collecting the data from those areas. In fact, what we found was some of the data was wrong, faulty data. So we actually had to go down into the field. You know, we had collaborators on the ground. We actually went and said, you need to change your GPS systems, improve the data that was collected, and then rerun the kind of models and algorithms to see if we were capturing the reality of what was happening. So, so it takes time. So because especially since we are dealing with real, messy, noisy data, it is not going to be like a one-shot. We develop an algorithm, okay, throw it at the problem, and boom, you're done. It's actually like a very, very complex system. The implementation of the solution takes several more years than the implementation or the development of an algorithm.
That's interesting. I mean, what Sriram mentioned, that AI is not a genie in a magic lamp. AI is not magic. And he also mentioned that it's always human-supported. So it's a complement to the human ability. You're talking about how the physical infrastructure also needs to be corrected all the time.
Yes.
So then AI, which is being sold to us as a panacea for all the social evils, all the problems in the world, is a bit of a, how should I put it, false advertisement, so to say.
Maybe I wouldn't say that, right? It's incredibly powerful, right? I mean, I tell you, right? What Lavanya is saying is true. But at the same time, AI is incredibly powerful. Let me just tell you why incredibly powerful it is, right? I mentioned access and equity as a very important aspect in places like India, right? If you look at inclusion and what fraction of India gets included in the digital economy, it's actually a very small fraction, right? And it's due to two technologies that fraction is increasing. One is actually the smartphone. It has nothing to do with AI. The fact that everybody has now a computing device on their pocket is actually a real revolution. It has really changed India, and everybody now has access, right? But that access alone is not sufficient, because there's not enough literacy, there is not enough awareness to access services. You know, just because I have a smartphone, maybe I can watch YouTube, but maybe I can't do anything else, right? what AI does is actually it enables you to talk to that smartphone conversationally in your voice instead of, you don't have to know what app to ask for. You now have this possibility of an agent where you can talk to in your language, right? That is incredibly powerful, right? So I would say, Aditi, right? I'm a realist in the sense that AI is definitely not a panacea, but at the same time, it is a real empowerment. But the problems are so large that I would be better off with AI than without it.
I want to add to that because actually what I'm pointing it out is not that AI is not powerful. What we are saying is we need to feed it the right data. We need to feed it the right information, the right data, the right expert knowledge to guide the algorithms. So all of that has to be there. And those are not really part of the AI. Those are the elements that have to be combined with the algorithms and the AI to make it actually equitable, efficient, accessible, all of that. So yes, it's not a panacea. But at the same time, like I would agree with Sriram, it is incredibly powerful. But you have to make sure that you are operating it in the right way.
And a lot of work remains to take this powerful technology and really solve these problems. That's not a done deal.
And the solving of the problems, whether it's the pre-phase, which where you're collecting data and so on, and making sure that that data stream is continuous and streaming in as the system is being implemented. But even afterwards, like monitoring and really understanding the outcomes, are they really what you're intending, that also needs to be done. It's not, again, it's not a one-shot system. You really have the pre-phase and the post-phase, which have to be done continuously as well.
Right. Those points are really interesting, and especially Sriram, what you said about how the mobile phone in our pocket isn't necessarily AI. So I had two conflicting answers to that from two different people. One was the Google head of privacy policy, if I remember correctly. And in an interview, he had said that even Google Maps is AI. So we walk around with AI in our pockets. It's just that exactly what you said. The way we are accessing information, that's undergoing a seismic shift. And then I interviewed Anna Makunju, who's the head of public policy for OpenAI. You would know her because Microsoft OpenAI. And she said something very interesting, that when it comes to solving for problems of inclusion, digital inclusion, that is something that AI can't solve for. That is something where we need a whole of society approach, where the government also has to intervene. We need to have digital literacy. We need to have telecommunication systems set up. So I want to transition into something else, which is when we're talking about social good, we are talking about not just, as you have been talking about, individual level transformation, or what you've been talking about, population scale transformation. This is social good. So there are certain risks attached to it. We've discussed some of them, like bad data going in or predictive analytics. How do we deal with those risks, such as risks related to bias in the data or exclusion because of lack of access, or bad data inputs, or privacy, or workers' rights? How do we deal with that?
Maybe Aditi, right? I'm happy to answer them, right? But there's one thing I really want to make sure before we get there, right? Bias, all those important problems, right? It's extremely important, for example, if you do a technology or AI-based intervention, measuring it and making sure that it works first. You asked that question earlier. It's also super important, right? And then we'll get to bias and so on. Because in many cases, right, we think that we can solve a problem by deploying a technology. That assumption may actually be wrong. It may actually, you may put in a shiny object. It might not actually work. And even if it works, right, one has to distinguish between usage versus outcome, right? So I might put something out, and people might use it for various reasons, right? But does it really reduce TB? Does it eradicate TB, right? Like, I might actually put out YouTube videos for education, and people might watch it. But does it improve their understanding of the subject, right? So those, I think, are very important things to measure as well. So I just wanted to before we get to bias and so on, right? One of the extremely important things, because we are using, in many cases, right, when we do social good, we are using government money, right? We really should make sure that we measure outcomes to make sure that they actually solve the problems that they're intending to solve. I'll just say that first, right?
Actually,
and not doing that is not doing that is irresponsible. So I'd say that.
No.
Yeah.
That's a good intervention. What has the government's response to this been?
See, I think governments,
Indian government in particular.
So I think, when we work with them with this approach, right, they are even more open. See, what I find is that when you go to government saying actually, oh, I have the shiny object that will solve a problem, you sort of become like a salesman, right? But when you go as a partner to say that my actual goal is to actually solve this problem, and I'm actually open to even understanding whether this technology will work or not. If it doesn't work, I won't be the first person to know about it so that I can fix it, right? That, I think, approach is actually really, really endearing when you go talk to the government. Because then I think you and government are on the same page.
And is this something that the government understands, or are they also attracted by the solutions that are looking for problems at times? Because as you said, a lot of people who are working in quote-unquote AI space, I say that with an asterisk attached to it, because I get a lot of pitches from different companies that are supposedly in the AI field, and what they're using is they just know how to use Microsoft Excel really well. So how do you go about identifying who's genuinely using AI for a genuine outcome versus who's selling snake oil?
So, do you want to take that? Or?
Lavanya, if you want to go first, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And this kind of goes back to your earlier question about the difference between data analytics and AI. And a lot of people might be selling data analytics, again, repackaged as AI. And this is where, again, what you really want to do is go back to those points that we discussed earlier. What is happening? Is there this data collection phase? Is that ongoing? Or are you working on static data? Are you looking at continuously measuring outcomes that come from this? And is that continuously ongoing? And are those outcomes being measured, multiple outcomes being measured? Are they giving you feedback into improving what these algorithms or analytics does? And if that's not happening, that's one way to measure. Like, as you improve the data or you throw different data at it, or you're observing that on different types of communities, is the solution looking different according to how you would expect? And this is where the human intelligence comes in. You really want to say, you have these metrics of how you want to measure the system and what its intended outcomes are. Often, these metrics are multiple of them. There's no single metric by which you would say, this is the one metric of the system. It could be access plus equity plus efficiency. And there is some combination of all of these that hits the sweet spot. And you want to measure all of those and then say, how do you want to tune the system as it goes along? And is it tunable? If the system does not allow that kind of tunability, then you know that that is the snake oil version. Versus if the system does allow that kind of tunability and learning as it goes along, then it is closer to the AI version. And again, what kind of algorithms, of course, all of that goes in. But without completely even opening the hood, there are certain tests that you can do. And the other thing is actually opening the hood and looking at it. Like, what are the algorithms that go into it? Do you have the right technical expertise and so on? Government may or may not have it, but if you were to partner with some industry research lab, academia, et cetera, that would be one way of looking at, can we open that hood and see if you really have the cutting edge there?
I think I could keep asking both of you questions throughout the day, in fact.
But do you want to do this privacy bias thing? We didn't cover
Yes, it's just that we have 5 minutes. So I wanted to check with the audience if they have any questions. Yes, sir, in the New York cap.
Yeah, thank you for the insight. My question is actually to Dr. Sriram. So, Microsoft and Google have been actually prominent in doing all kinds of research for the various AI algorithms. But the main threat lies with the generative AI, with the large use of the generative AI. I agree that...
Sir, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Can you step 2 steps ahead? Yeah, thank you.
I agree that it all depends on how actually humans use AI. But with majorly the development of generative AI, there is a very huge possibility of misusing it. So my question is, how does MSR plan on mitigating or addressing these kinds of issues?
Yeah. So what the community has been doing and what we have also been doing is that there is actually something called responsible AI paradigm in how you develop these solutions. So that involves figuring out policies on privacy, on how the data that was used to train, how that was collected, and then making sure that you do something called red teaming, where you ask the model adversarial questions to see whether it gives harmful answers, does it give biases. So there's an engineering process you can go through to first test, whether the model together with an application is suitable for a purpose, and and only release it after that. And then I think you have to ask questions about what purpose this application is being used for, right? Is that something that we would do and then sleep well at night? You have to introspect yourself. And every company that releases an AI product, right, has to have an ethics review board and responsible AI board to do all of these things. And all of these are guardrails that one has to do before releasing any product. And everybody has to follow that. And the government has to enforce regulation that every product that ships in the country has to go through that. Just like, you can't ship an automobile without going through safety. I mean, every car that you see actually has gone through that process, right? So you have to do the same thing.
I think, sir, the gentleman in the lime green shirt had raised his hand first. Yes.
Yeah, it was a similar question on fake news. However, my second question will be, what kind of AI initiatives we are taking for climate change?
Yeah, there are quite a few that we are taking, both in terms of how we are designing vehicles, how we are operating different aspects of things that are affected by climate change. For example, I'll give you just one example. Different fleets in transportation, we are looking at what are the properties that make certain vehicles more susceptible to burning more fuel, or burning fuel faster, the rate at which it burned, and so on. And how do you manage those different kinds of fleets, for example? And as you introduce EVs into the population, what needs to be done? So all of those, one by one, are technologies through which you are actually looking at mitigating climate change. Others are really looking at how do you understand where even this is not my personal work, but I've seen other colleagues work on it. But see where are the big impacts on ice sheets, for example. All of those, including you can use AI to model where are the highest impacts or predict that, and really go out there and measure and see, again, validate all of that and go back and see how you should change your policies accordingly. So all of those are being used. Again, you want to look at AI as a set of tools. It's a set of mathematical tools, statistics, predictive decision-making tools. So again, you can use that for many kinds of problems. Some of what we have done is really looking at, again, exploration, exploitation for different kinds of fleets to say how do you mitigate, how do you collect enough information about systems so that you mitigate environmental impacts on the rest of the system. So all of these are different technologies that are being developed.
Got it. Ma'am, to my right.
Yeah. So as you've spoken about like many AIs and like AIs with like specific functions. So in my daily life, I use mainly ChatGPT and I keep asking it so many different questions. So how exactly do you like teach the AI all this like different stuff?
So, so what you can do is that all these, I mentioned, these large language models are trained on all of the world's knowledge. I mean, that's what they are trained on. So they, pretty much, you could think that they probably have read the entire web. So they have that kind of knowledge, right? So, but they don't, like, suppose you are a company, you have your own private data, then the AI model rightfully doesn't know that. It shouldn't, right? Because it's your private data. So there are techniques like retrieval augmented generation, where you can actually combine the knowledge that the model like GPT-3 has together with your own local knowledge, right? It's called retrieval augmented generation. You can actually use that. There's actually something else called fine tuning that you can use to fine tune a big AI model's knowledge with your own local knowledge. So there are many, many things you can do like that. So you could actually search for the terms retrieval augmented generation and fine tuning as a start. But there's many such things you can do to, in some sense, teach a model more specific things for your task in hand.
So basically like it's learning from the prompt that I'm giving it?
Yeah, so that's also another thing. It's actually called in-context learning. You can actually also make it learn from the prompt. That it's possible, yeah.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Namaskar. My question is, can we use AI in the policy making process? Since the census exercise is long pending and the waiting, So is there any government initiative have taken place in the India or across the globe? They have used AI for social policy generation and other things.
So social policy generation in general or for census in
Uh,
particular?
I mean, since the large number of data is generated from the government, and can we use the, is there any use case for the policy making?
I'll make a brief remark and maybe Lavanya may can add, right?
And then
It
can
is
you
possible.
also address the question of predictive analytics and threat to privacy?
Yeah,
I had to inject.
yeah. So it is possible, right? The reason why this makes sense, I mean, think about actually, these kinds of large language models and so on, is that if you give these things a huge amount of data and ask a question, they can actually reason about them. So you might ask questions like, here is the census information in my country. What are the top things I should be concerned about? And the model will give you suggestions. I mean, they may not be the final definitive ones, but they could be candidates for a committee to look at and think about policy, right? So in that sense, actually, they can be an extremely effective tool to do background work to design policy. But I wouldn't trust them to design the policy themselves. I mean, that would be a huge mistake to do that. But using them as a sounding board to get information to design a policy is something that could be worthwhile.
There have been other cases where AI has been used to actually help social policy. For example, in some cases in prison corrections programs across the US, people have looked at which kind of people need to be intervened with more. For example, parole correctees and others. How often do they need to be checked in with? And which people, under what interventions, need less check-ins, for example. And once you have that information, at least again, this is not it's just an aid. It's helped people use it, like the parole officers use it to say, okay, how often should I check certain people versus others when you're highly resource constrained? And so this essentially helps less people get back into prison. So otherwise, if the right people are being checked in with more often, they stay on the straight and narrow, and you want to keep them there.
So is there a racial bias to this kind of data processing in prisons, especially in the US? Because
there has been, and there's been ways to correct it as well. So once you actually realize that there is such a bias, immediately you start to say, how should the models be corrected? And this is where we talk about the intelligence in the modeling, that the human who's operating it immediately needs to change or tune the objective function in a way to say, how do I correct for bias? And make sure that certain sections of the population are not being disproportionately targeted in some way, or being less corrected more versus corrected less, for example.
in fact, what Sriram talked about, I had tried to generate the Digital Personal Data Protection Act using ChatGPT-4 before it was notified in the parliament. And it basically regurgitated a copy of the GDPR, EU's data regulation. So that's also another angle where bias comes in, where a lot of the knowledge that we have online is dominated by the West. I think we are running out of time, so we'll take one last question. The gentleman in the first row. Yeah.
So currently I'm doing a project in computer vision related to emotion detection in schools. So I've hit sort of a snag with the ethical considerations there. So just wanted to know, how does Microsoft and UIUC deal with the ethical considerations related to data set or data gathering? And sort of just how do you get around that?
See, by now, we sort of understand what is PII and what is non-PII. PII is called personally identifiable information, and non-PII is actually non-personally identifiable, right? I mean, it's very clear. I mean, things that identify uniquely with me or you are personally identifiable, right? My Aadhaar number, or my social security number, my credit card number, my salary, they are all my personal data, right? So those you treat differently, right? Other things like, how many people in India get TB, those are all community information. So those, I think, are not typically as sensitive. So when you collect information, right, you have to be clear about which is personally identifiable and which is not. And then you treat those differently. That's like the number one thing you have got to do. And then for each of those data, right, you have policies and what you're allowed to do with it and what you're not allowed to do with it. And then you need to have technological and process safeguards to ensure that those policies are actually enforced. So that's roughly how you think about it, right? Then there's many details, but that's roughly how you think about it. Yeah.
I agree with Sriram here. From a university point of view, we are actually subject to specific guidelines. What kind of data actually needs to be eliminated from our analysis. Literally, we take the data, completely mask it, and throw out pieces of it which are personally identifiable. And even when we run experiments, we look at a person's, like let's say we have a subject who's actually buying something and our algorithm is doing something. We remove that particular person's information. We just say, is it a yes or no kind of answer based on certain broad demographics as opposed to individual demographics. So that's part of how we do it. But again, I think Sriram has given a much more comprehensive answer. And we continue to look at other ways, like we've actually built algorithms that are GDPR compliant that eliminate that kind of information.
So I'll add to what he asked and ask you about group privacy and group characteristics, which is, for instance, let's say I see that a whole bunch of people are buying prayer mats. I don't know who those individuals are, but I can come to certain conclusions about a neighborhood. And that was seen by the Indian government as being violative of group privacy when they were dealing with non-personal data. So that's one. The other part is group characteristics. For instance, what happened with Instagram and Facebook earlier, when during the, well, it's still ongoing, but the Israel-Gaza war attack, however you may want to qualify it, when you wrote the word Palestinian, it would follow it up with terrorists. So it wasn't necessarily picking it up from individual data, but group data, if you want to address that.
So, one thing that is extremely important is that with these kinds of things, right, it's not the case that you address them once with your data, and for every application, the responsible AI process you went through will just work. It's just not the case, right? Which is why these things have to be continuously monitored, and for every application and every use case that comes up, right, you have to keep revisiting them. It's a difficult problem, because it's not like you can check once and then for all applications it works, right? The examples that you said, right, with non-personal data, certain groups can still get harmed. You have to actually figure that out and get that feedback into your process and then change your process to deal with that too. So, so this is a situation where you have to admit that whatever process you have is not perfect, but it's better than not having it. And you have to be open to the fact that the process has to be improved. That's the only way to do it.
Okay.
I would add just one brief point in the interest of time.
Yes, yes.
Just one thing you have to consider is how much of that is being used to make decisions. Suppose you know that information, say the prayer mats, information. Is that used
I send more
somehow?
police to that area.
Exactly.
That's a problem then.
Is that the kind of decision you would make? And that's where you start to intervene and say, I want to correct that bias.
Exactly. Application. You want to prevent that application from, you want to prevent that use from being even made, right? That's what you need to do.
Thank you, Sriram. Thank you, Lavanya. Thank you, all the people in the audience. I know there are a few questions still pending. So the speakers are around and you can approach them. Okay, thank you.